People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. Maya Angelou.
I also remember having to tell some of my colleagues they had to change the signage in their offices. Nothing like walking into someone's office and seeing a sign that said, "No, what part of no don't you understand?" Or "Your crisis is not my problem," or, your lack of planning doesn't equal my, blah, blah, blah. And just telling my colleagues that, like, you can't have this sign up. What impression are you giving to people when they walk in your office and they see nothing but no?
Growing up, Maria Brewer knew what it felt like to be othered, to be treated as an outsider. The memory of those feelings never left, and she spent her diplomatic career, which included 2 ambassadorships, looking for inclusivity and ways to get to yes. In fact, I want to say that it was her aversion to the word no that fueled her spectacular career. I'm Christopher Wurst, and this is
Soft Power.
Powerful.
Soft
Power.
Powerful stories.
Powerful.
Soft
Powerful. Stories.
I was born in Northwest Indiana, grew up in a town called Portage. It was a nice place to grow up. I always tell people very quiet, very suburban, but not very diverse. In Northwest Indiana, there are a number of steel mills, and those steel mills drew immigrants from all over the world, including my Slovak grandparents on my father's side and my Mexican grandparents on my mother's side. Growing up in Indiana, and particularly in my town, there were very few Hispanics around. My brother, and I are markedly look different, dark skin, dark hair, dark eyes than the kids I grew up with. And I remember this happening several years in a row. The first day of school, I would walk in and kids are, calling off the roll. And the teacher had said to me, again, this happened several years in a row, "What are you?" Not who are you, not what is your background, but literally, what are you? As an adult, I look back at that question and I just kind of reel with both the ignorance and the rudeness of it. I mean, now I would say, well, I'm a little girl. But at the time, I knew what they meant. I looked different. And so I would have to, and I'm talking 6, 7, 8 years old, I would have to introduce myself to the class by explaining that my mother's family was from Mexico and my father's family was Slovak. I was born in Indiana and I grew up in Indiana, and, basically I was just like them. Looking back now, again, as an adult, I see how much that otherness and that difference in how I was seen and perceived affected how I move in the world today. And I can see how it prepared me to be a diplomat. I was born in the early 70s. The idea was mainstreaming and sort of assimilation was the key. A lot of things, including language, were not encouraged or replicated. I didn't learn Spanish, for example, until I went to high school. So even though my mother was fluent in both English and Spanish. So there was a certain amount of pressure to assimilate and to downplay the effects of being sort of seen as different in my community. I was really a bookworm. I would go to the library almost every weekend and come back with a stack of books, even from, kindergarten on. When we would go to the mall, my mom would just drop me off at the bookstore and go and do her shopping and pick me up an hour or two later. And I would have read probably several books by then. I was just a real nerd. I loved sci-fi, I loved travel, and I loved books about faraway places. Growing up in the Midwest, not very exciting, surrounded by cornfields, not very cosmopolitan. Just my imagination was fired up by these books, dreaming of places where I could go and see different things, the Great Pyramids, go on safari, see the Taj Mahal, all these wonders of the world that I couldn't even imagine, would come alive for me in these books. I knew that I wanted to go out into the world and do something important and worthwhile. It wasn't until I was actually in university that I realized that I wanted something in the international field. I studied Spanish and International Economics and Cultural Affairs at Valparaiso University, also in Northwest Indiana. At the time, NAFTA had just been signed, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Things were opening up between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, and I thought, well, great, I have the Spanish now, and, it would be wonderful to work somewhere in sort of international business. So that's what I thought I would be doing. In my senior year, I was preparing to take all of the tests that you take, the LSAT, the GMAT, the GRE, and I was, I think, talking to my school careers center about, what to do and how to take all these courses. And someone said, hey, there's this other test you can take. It is to get into the State Department and to join the Foreign Service. And best of all, it's free. And I was like, free? And I was a scholarship student my entire college career, and anything that was free sounded incredibly exciting to me. And I remember one of the counselors said to me something like, oh, you won't pass the exam because it's a very hard exam. Nobody passes it. You won't pass it, but you'll learn and it'll be a good experience. And then if you take it again, you'll know what to expect. I was sure. And what the heck, And at that time, it's hard to explain to young people these days. There was no Reddit. There was we barely had the internet at all. The listservs were just nascent. So there was no information. There was, I think, a booklet. I had no idea what to expect walking into this exam. Oddly enough, as it turned out, my coursework, as well as my love of reading and access to, I was working at a credit union, so I had access to all of their periodicals. So I was reading like U.S. News and World Report and Time. And this is back when those magazines actually carried real news. So it just so happened that the exam followed or mirrored almost completely what I was studying in university. So I passed the exam the first go around, which was shocking even to me. Again, sort of fell backward into it. And then I took the oral exam. At the time, they were offering it in Chicago. Passed that. Again, completely surprised. I was the only one in the cohort that day of people being tested who passed. Like this old saying goes, the more prepared I am, the luckier I get. I certainly had that as well, but it was sort of the stars aligning. I was not certain what I was getting into at all when I joined the State Department. I didn't even know people who worked for the federal government. Government wasn't considered really a job where I grew up. Like a job was a thing you did with your hands or you did with your mind and created something. Working for the government, being a bureaucrat, wasn't a career path that was even accessible or necessarily desirable. So I really didn't know what I would be doing other than working in an embassy. And I think in some ways, being so inexperienced and unknowledgeable worked in my advantage because I had no preconceived notions. I was very young. I was the youngest in my class. I was 23 years old. And I just kind of said, send me, whatever you need, I'll do. Why not? I had just imposter syndrome on steroids, really very much felt like a fish out of water. It was my first experience with people who used summer as a verb, as in summering in the vineyard. What language is this? Like, where am I? I was dropped into this from the middle of nowhere with my 2 good suits that I had, graduated in, and really felt very much out of place. And I'm sure like a lot of people did, I did a lot of nodding and smiling and going, sure, faking it. But going back to my childhood, actually, there is a through line. Because so often I felt out of place or othered, it actually created in me determination to succeed. Maybe I couldn't compete with them in money or in background or status or name dropping or Ivy League schools, but no one can outwork me. No one can dedicate me. No one else would be able to succeed in that. And that was something that I kind of clung to as my edge. As someone who, frankly, once worked 3 jobs at the same time while carrying a more than full course load in university, I knew that I could outwork anyone. I remember when I was a kid, the movie Chariots of Fire came out. It's about anti-Semitism and the Olympics, and there's a young man who is othered because he's Jewish, and he runs in the Olympics. And I remember at one point in the movie, someone asked to him about his motivation, and he's like, I can't stop every person who's going to treat me badly, but what I can do is take them on one by one and run them off their feet. And the fact that I remember that specific quote, and I haven't seen the movie since the 1980s when it came out, tells you what an impact it had on me. That I can't outcompete people in but I could take them on one by one and run them off their feet. Intellectually, not physically. It's not an athlete.
Was there a moment that you remember thinking to yourself, I do belong here?
I think it was probably during my first tour. I was in Lagos, Nigeria, and I was working in the American Citizen Services section, and there was a huge backlog of passport renewals. In the 70s and 80s, Nigeria had discovered oil. They sent many young people to the U.S. for university education. Those young people, as you might imagine, had children and then returned back to Nigeria. So this was in the late 90s. So a lot of those infants, literal infants, were coming back to the U.S. Embassy in Lagos, Nigeria, which was then in Lagos, Nigeria, to get their passports renewed because they themselves were ready to go to university in the U.S. or wanted to go to the U.S. for some reason. So we had a huge backlog of passports for many young men and women standing in front of us with pictures of infants, and that was it. And this had been going on for several years. So the backlog was intense. Our lines for our American Citizen Services section at sometimes were even as long as our visa lines, if you can imagine that. And what was happening was many of my colleagues felt like they couldn't make a decision. They weren't sure, so they just let it ride. And they kept asking for more and more documentation. And I got there and I was like, this is ridiculous. We've got to make decisions. And so I sat with our fraud prevention folks. I talked to people who were experts in facial recognition patterns. Interestingly enough, your ears shape and your nose shape doesn't change. They may get bigger, but the shape never changes unless you have an accident or some other, big reason. So I got very good at studying noses and ears, and we would look at the passports, and we'd ask the applicants for pictures of them and their family growing up and information about their parents and why they were in the U.S. And we would piece all that together and try to decide if the young adult standing in front of us was the infant in the picture. And so I cut through this incredible backlog just because I was willing to make a decision. I was willing to put my neck out there and say yes or no, where so many others, they just didn't feel confident enough. They were, waffling, and they'd sort of kick the can down the road. And I was like, no, I'm sorry, this is. So I felt like at that point, and the people around me were kind of shocked, including my supervisors who supported me because they also were getting a lot of pressure about why is the American Citizen Services section so crazy? Certainly being in Nigeria at that time, I saw the impact of what our power was, not just the direct power, but also our influence and kind of what an outsized effect that had on other countries. At the time, Nigeria had a dictator, Sani Abacha. He had, sort of overthrown or overcome a democratic election in a military coup. The U.S. government retaliated by putting on a whole range of sanctions, including visa sanctions. So I could see through our consul work, actually, the impact of our sanctions. And our ambassador at the time, Walter Carrington, who passed away a few years ago, he was very much aligned with the democratic movement, which was an underground movement. And I could see how much his speaking out against the dictatorship and his relationship with those democratic, civil society organizations, what an impact it had. It wasn't necessarily in the form of money. It wasn't necessarily in the form of the hard power, guns, bullets, that sort of thing. It was the influence and the almost moral imperative to support democracy. Ultimately, Sani Abacha died while I was there. We saw elections take place after that. And the fact that civil society was able to stand itself back up, I think, was due in part to the U.S. government supporting them. And again, not necessarily financially, but really just, encouraging them and giving them the wherewithal not to fold and completely, fall apart. That was a very powerful, example of where the U.S. can really, have an impact. I love being a management officer. It was my chosen cone. I thought management was exciting. This is where you actually achieve things. I lived and worked in many postings that we call in the State Department hardship postings, where things were not like the U.S. and goods were not easy to get and water and power were not available to you at the flick of a switch. So every day was an exercise in problem solving, having real world immediate impact on the work of the embassy, because frankly, without power, without water, you can't get anything done. So it was exciting to me. I definitely, and I believe this, and I said this to many of the people I mentored as I came up, that diplomacy within the mission was as important, if not more important than diplomacy outside of the mission. That diplomacy with your colleagues, particularly individuals where you don't have authority over them, that diplomacy was actually much more important and much more difficult. You were dealing with influence, persuasion, a lot of the very soft diplomatic skills. You would have to create relationships and draw upon those relationships in a way that very often we think about in sort of international diplomacy, but I experienced intensely within the building, within the embassy or consulate. I would counsel my, again, more junior colleagues in management that you have 360-degree relationships with people. Very often in the embassy setting, you're living with them, you're working with them, your kids go to school together. If your dog bites your neighbor who is the regional security officer on the leg, and then tomorrow you say, oh, I need this secure container cleared so that we can bring it into the embassy, chances are that RSO might not be so quick to clear your container. I mean, it is wild how intertwined our lives become. And I remember I might have been an entry-level officer when the legendary, management officer of all time, Pat Kennedy, came and spoke to our class. He told a story about being a GSO in Moscow, and he said that he had a colleague come in and ask for 3 things. And 2 of the things he could not do. They were just impossible. But the third thing that the colleague asked for was a cat scratching post. His cat was going to destroy his furniture. Pat said he was talking to the warehouse staff, and he said, we can't do the first 2 things. I think the person had asked for new furniture or something that was just ridiculous, right? And he said, but we do have some scrap lumber and some scrap carpet. So can we nail this guy together or, make him quickly a cat post? And they're like, but that's not something we do. And Pat told the story. He's like, yeah, but how hard would that be? We have the scrap material. And he said that they did that and they gave it to this officer. So we can't give you A and B, but we can do C for you. The guy was thrilled, so happy, completely changed the relationship. And it turned from this GSO is unhelpful to what a great creative solution. And so that story always stuck with me. And very often in management work, I found that my colleagues and people who worked with me would start off with no, and then you'd have to argue them into yes. And I'm like, why don't you start off with yes and see what you can do? Maybe what the customer's asking for, you can't do it in that order, in that way precisely, but get to the heart. What do they want to achieve? What is their goal? Is there a way to get to their goal that they may not see, but you can see? Or do you just say no and throw the problem back onto their lap?
If someone would have told you when you were sitting as a 23-year-old in the A100 class that you would be presidentially nominated to be an ambassador and then be raising your hand and being sworn in as a U.S. ambassador, would you have believed that?
I would not have believed them. I still kind of sometimes can't believe I was a U.S. ambassador, not once, but twice. It is the pinnacle of our profession. Not everyone aspires to be it. And in fact, for many years, if you had asked me, I would say, oh, I don't want to be an ambassador. I like what I'm doing. I was lucky. A lot of people, when they look at my two countries that I served in, Sierra Leone and the Kingdom of Lesotho, they might be underwhelmed, let's say, by the countries themselves and the size or whatever. But I have to say, I loved being in smaller posts. I felt a freedom and a sense of ability to shape my actions and activities in a way that I think a lot of the larger posts don't have. Having served in Nigeria, where the National Security Council was constantly asking us for updates, and we were on video calls, and there was intense scrutiny and everything the embassy was doing. To go to a country and be in a post that was smaller, where I could spend a lot of time mentoring, training, and where I knew the broad outlines of what I needed to achieve, but how I was doing that day to day was up to me and my team, and that was lovely. So that was a freedom that I think sometimes gets undersold when people are looking at the powerful or the power of a job. Actually, I think in some of the more front page news kinds of places, you actually have less power in the job because you have many more people second guessing everything you're doing.
Both of those countries benefited a lot from U.S. programs in the development side. And I'm just curious what your impressions were.
Yeah. In both countries, the U.S. government, I can say unequivocally, saved lives directly. Our activities, whether it was fighting Ebola in Sierra Leone, fighting HIV/AIDS in Lesotho, hundreds, if not thousands of lives were saved by our activities. I really can't overstate how much we did, how much our interventions helped, whether it was medicines, testing, training local health providers. In every way, what the U.S. government did was life-saving and absolutely fundamental to those countries being able to continue to operate, to not literally dissolve. Sierra Leone, during Ebola, that was before my time, but I arrived not long after it was eradicated there. That entire region was failing, frankly. Had the U.S. government, particularly U.S. CDC and USAID, been involved intimately in a very hands-on way, I honestly don't know what would have happened in those countries, in Sierra Leone especially. Similarly, Lesotho, I'm old enough to remember the 90s and early 2000s in Southern Africa. The death toll, literally generation wiped out. Orphans. I remember my colleagues, I was serving in West Africa at the time, but I remember my colleagues in management in Southern Africa telling me that they would hire 2 and 3 people for a job, hoping that one of them would live long enough to take the job. It was so dire. So to go to Lesotho in 2021, 2022, and be there to see a place where 26% of all adults had HIV, it was amazing to me to see that this was no longer a death sentence, that mothers could give birth to HIV-negative babies due to the medications that they were giving, due to the medications that we were able to provide them with. People could get married and have children and not pass on HIV to their partners. We were actually seeing the numbers of new infections go down to such a small amount that we were turning the corner. And we really felt like in a generation, honestly, HIV/AIDS could be a thing of the past if we were able to get people on medications to suppress the viral load. Amazing. Like, incredible. I have to say, since I retired last year and the dissolution of USAID, the impact on foreign assistance, I shudder to think what's happening. I don't know. And I don't know that we will know the full story for another few years because data takes a while to come out and to be studied. But I am terrified about what will happen. We learned, and certainly with COVID, that disease does not respect borders. It doesn't respect international lines drawn on a map. We're all impacted, particularly by global health threats. So the fact that the U.S. has left the field, has walked out, it's with such a critical national security risk. I am saddened because I don't see the issue framed in that way by anyone. Very often I see the issue framed as charitable versus non-charitable, and Americans are charitable. We are giving people. I don't want to make it sound like charity isn't important. Charity is important, but this is not just a charitable issue. This is truly a national security issue, whether it is global health, whether it is extremism due to, factors such as poverty, where, people are drawn into extremism. I find it amazing that we can be so unaware of history, recent history, to think that we can walk away from these incredibly important interventions without there being an impact. In Sierra Leone, when I was there when the George Floyd murder took place. And it was not just in the U.S. a phenomenon of people protesting and marching, but also globally. I remember hearing from one of my colleagues that one of our first tour staff was, feeling very strongly about what happened in the U.S. and what was going on with just the ongoing police violence, but particularly catalyzed by the George Floyd murder. I heard that this individual wanted to stage a protest in front of the U.S. Embassy with other Americans who were locally resident, not official Americans, but locally resident Americans. So I called this person in and I said, it was the first tour person. So they were still learning kind of how things work. And I said, you really can't protest the U.S. government because we're paying your salary and we paid you to be here. And you can't march in front of the gates with a sign that's anti-U.S. government. And she was like, but this, and I could see she felt very strongly. And I understood because it was horrible. So I said, what, again, just like the GSO story, what are you really trying to achieve? What do you want to have happen? And she said, I want to express my feelings, and my friends want to express their feelings, and we want to publicly decry police violence. And I said, okay, particularly, police violence that's related to African Americans, especially being in a West African country and being an American citizen. And I said, okay, I get that. And I actually agree with you. I said, let's do this instead. How about instead of a protest in front of the gates, we have a candlelight vigil. It was during the day. We have a candlelight vigil. We can do prayers. We can do songs. People can speak. We can talk about these issues. We can have 8 minutes and 46 seconds of silence. We can recite the names of people who've been victims of this kind of violence. So that's what we wound up doing. It was during COVID, you may remember. So it was outdoors during the day. So we did have candles, but it was bright out. But we were able to meet the need, which was to give people a place to talk about these issues. We were able to fulfill the need and to allow the issue to come forward that, again, I personally identified with and I felt strongly about. Especially in West Africa, a lot of countries, they see the U.S. as this sort of huge monolith that sometimes throws its weight around in a non-humble way. So I found that very often starting out, whether I was talking about democracy and supporting full, free, transparent elections in whatever country, by saying, the U.S. isn't perfect, by starting out that way and acknowledging that we still struggle with democracy and carrying out perfectly, that this is a journey we can go on together and we can help you learn from our mistakes and, make sure that your election is as full, free, and transparent as possible. That attitude and that little bit of humility would get us much further than marching and saying, well, America, we've been a democracy for 250 years. You should just be like us and everything will be great. I hate to say it, that motto does not get very far in the world. In Lesotho, fighting HIV/AIDS was one of our big programs where we spent a lot of our money, our time, our effort. We found that there were certain populations where we were still having a hard time getting the numbers that we needed. And one of those populations was the LGBTQIA+ community. And so, again, because I know what it's like to be othered, I know what it's like to be marginalized and ignored, I felt a great affinity with these very small civil society groups that worked on LGBTQ issues. So we would bring them in. We would support them. We would have, we would recognize the International Day of Transvisibility, for example. I would go to their events that they hosted, these civil society groups, very marginalized, very much not supported openly by much of the community. But I felt it was very important for us to be there. Again, not just because it was the right thing to do, which it is. These are human beings, and human rights apply to everyone, no matter what your orientation is. And this is absolutely something we should be doing as the U.S. government that says that we believe in human rights. But also because we were trying to access these groups to help, again, stop the spread of HIV/AIDS. So there was both a moral imperative as well as a pragmatic aspect. Again, I think a lot of my impetus for being so open and being so, I would show up, I'd be the only ambassador, I would be the only person at that level, and the local government would kind of allow it to happen, but not necessarily be that. But then for HIV/AIDS Day, World AIDS Day, December 1st, we would always make sure that these groups had a tent, had a stand in a pavilion. And when we would walk by, I would walk with the king and the prime minister, we would stop and talk to this group. So there would be pictures of the king talking to one of the members of this organization with the flag behind them, the rainbow flag behind them. And that picture would serve more to advance the human rights of these individuals, of LGBTQIA plus folks, than all of my speeches. That one image.
Absolutely. And as your PAO, as your public affairs officer, I would have made sure that you were framed perfectly for that picture.
Thank you.
I know that being an ambassador is a very surreal thing. It's, you are at the highest of the highest levels in that country, and yet you find yourself doing the weirdest, goofiest stuff. And I just wonder if you have a favorite only as a U.S. ambassador story.
In Sierra Leone, for some reason, I became kind of a mini celebrity. I set out to learn Creole on my own. Not through the Foreign Service Institute, which is a wonderful place. I worked there. It was my last job in the State Department. But I decided to learn it there in country. I love to collect proverbs in Creole, and I love to use them. And this is something I did also in Lesotho. I would try to collect local proverbs and then sprinkle them into my speeches. And people just loved it because a lot of people didn't bother to learn Creole. English was an official language. So no one would bother to learn it, but there were great parts of the country where people didn't really speak English that well. So it was just a wonderful access. So I became a little bit of a local celebrity because when I would travel, I would always go on local radio stations and speak a little Creole. And I was there during COVID, so I started sending out WhatsApp voice notes to my staff. Adi Fumble, Mornino, Aomi family and Padi Dem. Mena, Maria Brewer, U.S. ambassador. And I would then say something like, let's all be sure to wash your hands, listen to the health advice. Remember, teamwork is important. One finger no able take stone. One finger can't pick up a stone. That sort of thing. And so I found out that my voice notes were not just circulating within the embassy, within my local staff, but had gone out into the community. And were being reshared all over. And in fact, were being reshared all over the world. I heard from someone in the UK, I just heard you talking on this voice note. This is wild. I'm like, yeah, I guess, My security officer came in, Madam, people they're playing your voice notes everywhere. I said, I'm not saying anything controversial. I'm literally saying be strong, take care of your community, take care of your health.
Well, that means we're coming to the end of the episode, but I don't want to stop before I give Maria a chance to answer a question from our dubious Aunt Deb.
The more our problems mount here in the U.S., the less I think we can help other countries. That's just common sense, right?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that it is not an either-or proposition. So often these issues are framed as one or the other. Either we do X or we do Y. Either we take care of things at home or we help people, foreigners overseas. And it's not a great framing. It's not an either-or. It's a both and, or both together. As we've seen, whether it's terrorism or health threats, these are global, truly global issues that the U.S. is not immune to. And if we don't ensure that these threats are managed, they will come home to us. So whether it's international war making our gas prices rise, diplomacy and development are not nice to haves that you can walk away from because it feels inconvenient. They are have to haves that, again, directly relate to our ability to live the comfortable lives that we want to live here in the U.S. People all over the world have the same desires. They want to take care of their families. They want to live free, healthy. They want to prosper in whatever way, that is, by working to make sure that people in other countries also have those chances. We're increasing the chances that our people, that our families and our loved ones will have that same ability to live and work and grow and prosper. And as a human being, I can't imagine anything that's more important than that.
Maria Brewer is a leadership coach, speaker, and former U.S. ambassador whose diplomatic career spanned nearly 3 decades. She served as U.S. ambassador to Sierra Leone and the Kingdom of Lesotho and held senior leadership roles at the U.S. Department of State, including at the Foreign Service Institute, where she helped mentor and develop the next generation of American diplomats. Across postings in Africa, Asia, and Washington, Maria led diverse teams, navigated complex global challenges, and represented the United States at the highest levels of government. These experiences shaped the leadership philosophy she shares in her forthcoming book, The Ambassador's Leadership Edge, built on the principles of power, presence, and purpose. Today, Maria works with emerging and mid-career leaders, especially Latina professionals, through speaking, coaching, and writing. Her guiding motto, "Bloom where planted," reflects her belief that leadership grows through resilience, service, and the commitment to lift others as we climb. For more information, including on Maria's forthcoming book, check out the show notes at softpowerfulstories.org. Thanks so much for listening. We really appreciate it. If you liked what you heard, I hope that you will follow us if you haven't already. Leave a nice review. Give us a good rating. You can find out more at softpowerfulstories.org. There you can see pictures of our guests in action. You can find links to their work. And there's an opportunity to get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. Special thanks, as always, to my friend Kathy Zielski, who plays dubious Aunt Deb. She is nothing like dubious Aunt Deb, but she plays her to perfection. My name is Christopher Worst. I'm the host and producer of Soft Powerful Stories. Until next time.